Good morning, everyone. Today's Wednesday. Today we will learn the last Perek of Nazir, and tomorrow we are starting Sota Mirza Hashem. Moving right along. Today's shiur is really nice for Nachum Kohen Shomorcha Mishtev Bracha Sav Shmuel Lev and B'Yam Moshe Ben Yosef made the Hashem Shall have an Aliyah. And we first time of Yisrael Bracha Leah Bracha Bas Pesach Zelda Bracha Aliana Bas Yah Bracha Avram Yitzchak Ben Risha Chai Bas the Bela Refush Lam B'Sov Shaycha Yisrael. And Schus with Tzvi Noach Ben Bracha Rachalea and Nazir Ben Karev Shmuel Doi Ben Hinder Miriam. And shout out to our sponsor, Seder Nashim, the Imperial Advisory Group, helping companies with their CFO needs for the past 30 years. If you need help, please reach out to them at imperialgrp.com to see what they can do for you to help the financials of your business. Here we go. Perek test, the last Perek. Mishnah Aleph. Hagoyim ein lahem nazirus. Non-Jews do not have nazirus. And even if a non-Jew makes a vow of nazirus, he says he takes the neder, there's a nazir. It doesn't work. Nashim va'avadim yeshem nazirus. Women and Eved Canaanim, who are owned by Jews, they 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 can become Nazir. Now, an Eved Kanaani, as you might know, has before he became a slave, he was a goy. When he becomes a slave to a Jew, he's considered partially converted, and he is subject to all the mitzvahs that women must keep. Um, and that's learned in the Gemara in Chamiga. And so he's not chayiv in the mitzvahs asisha as grandma, but if a woman could become a nazir, then so could an Eved Kanani. There's something more strict about women who become nazirim than slaves who become nazir. Shahu kope es avdo. If a master can force his nazir slave to drink wine or become tamei, if this interferes with the slave's service to his master, but a husband cannot force his wife to drink wine or become tummy as long as she is a nazira, and she must keep all the nazirus laws even if her husband does not want her to. On the other hand, there's also something more strict about slaves who become nazirim than women who become nazirim. Shehu mayfair nidre ishta, because a husband can cancel his wife's vows, and if he cancels her vow of nazirus, she no longer has to keep it, even if she changes her mind. But the master could not cancel his slave's vows, and even after forcing a slave to drink wine and become tamei, if he later changes his mind and wants the slave to keep the vow, the slave must keep all the laws of nazirus. Hey for the ishta, hey for allowance. For this reason, if he cancels a vow of nazirus for his wife, he has canceled it forever. And even if he later dies or divorces her, she does not need to keep the laws of nazirus. Hey for the though, yet to the cheres. However, if he cancels a vow in Nazirus for his slave, he forces him not to keep the vow. Then, when the slave goes free, he must finish his Nazirus because the Nazirus is still in effect. However, if the slave left his master's presence and he ran away, there's a dispute as to whether he may drink wine. Rabbi Meir says, Lo Yishta, he may not drink wine. In this way, he will go back to his master sooner, since he will not be allowed to drink wine unless he is with his master. Even though drinking wine may not weaken the slave, the Meir considers it a greater benefit to the master to forbid the Nazir slave to drink wine, so that he will feel deprived and want to return to his master. Rabbi Yossi says, Yishted, he may drink wine because his master, who will eventually find him and bring him back, wants him to drink and stay healthy. Just as a slave can be forced to drink wine while in his master's home, so too he can be permitted to drink wine even when he is away from his master. this is master's since this is in his master's best interest, and he got to do what the boss wants. Mishnah Bays, Nazir Shegilach, if a Nazir finished his Nazirus and brought his Karbanas and shaved his head with no Da'alo Shutami, and then it became known that he had become Tami while he was a Nazir, then the Lach is as follows. Im Tama Yadua, if the source of the Tama was one that people could have known about, so Sarah causes him to forfeit all the days he observed, and he must start his Nazirus over again. The Tumas at the home, well, if the source was the Tumah of the deep, meaning a source that nobody knew about. It's not in an open area where people can see it. It's a very deep down. This is a body that's unknown to anybody, is trapped at a pilot level. And Soser does not cause him to forfeit the days he observed, and he does not have to start his Naziris over again. That all applies where he did not become aware of his tumah until after he shaved. But what if he discovered his tumah before he shaved? If he found out about the tumah before he shaved his head, whether it is a known tumah or whether it was a tumah of the deep, causes him to forfeit his naziris and start over again. Okay, it said, how so? Yara litva b'ma'ara. If he went down into a cave while he was a nazir to be tovel in a mikvah, the nim semeis saf al pnei hamara. And Olive's volume of a corpse was later found floating at the entrance to the cave. We do not know whether he touched it or not. Tameh, he's Tameh. Even if he does not find out about the corpse flesh until after he finished his Naziris and shaved, he must start his Naziris over again because the object that made him Tameh was in the open and people could have known about it. Nimsa Mashuka Bekarka Ma'arab, but if the mace was found sunken in the floor of the cave, nobody knew it was there, it's considered a tumah at the home, a tumah of the deep. So if the Nazir does not find out about this until after he shaved, then the halacha is yarad l'haker. If he had gone down into the cave in order to cool off in the water, tahar, he's tahar. Not have to repeat his Nazir because it is a tumah, because it's a tumah at the home, as we said earlier. The tahir and the tumah mace. However, if he had gone down into the cave because he was tummy from a corpse, and he needs to become Torah from tumah of the dead, but by immersing in mikveh, tamei, he is now tamei. He must repeat his naziris, even though it is a tumah even though the tumah is at the home. Shecheskas tamei tamei v'cheskas Torah Torah. This is because it's assumed that someone who's already tamei remains tamei, and that someone who is Torah remains Torah. So Raglayim Ladar, because the matter has legs to stand on, it's logical to assume that the Halacha must be Sinai about Tumas at the home was said only in regards to someone who was Tahar at the time, not in regards to someone who was very Tameh from a corpse and trying to become Tahar from it. The reason why Tumas at the home applies only to someone who is Tahar is because that's the way it was taught to Moshe at Har Sinai. The Mishnah is only saying that it's logical to assume that this was the way the halacha was read. To sum up, when a Naz becomes Tameh with Tumas at the home, does not need to repeat his Naziris. This only applies if two things are true. A, he does not find out that he had become Tameh until after he had already finished his Naziris by shaving. And B, at the time he came into contact with the unknown mace, he was not already Tameh with Tumas mace. Mishnah Gimel, Hamotzi mace. If someone finds a dead body and it's the first body found in this area, Mushkav Gedarko, and was laid out in the normal way in which Jews are buried. Right. So at the times of the Mishnah, it was the minute for Jews to be laid to rest on their backs, their hands folded over their chest. So if the body is not flat on his back, we assume that there was a non-Jew, and then it could be moved without following the rule I'm talking about. So not vest to so he may take So if it was laid out in a normal way without Jews are buried, like flat on the back with the hands crossed against the chest, then noto less to go sus. You may take it together with the earth associated with it, mean the ground underneath the body that likely absorbs some of the bodily fluids, and bury it somewhere else. This is because when a single body is found, it's not near any other bodies. We assume that the area was not a cemetery and that the body was buried there with the intention that it will later be moved. If you found two bodies in the same area, then the law is the halacha is still the same. Not one has two sons, and he may take them together with the earth surrounding it and bury them somewhere else. As we still don't assume that the cemetery when you find two bodies. Matzah shlosha. If we found three bodies, if between the first body and the third body there is a separation of between 4 and 8 amos. You have the first and third bodies no less than 4 amos apart and no more than 8 amos apart. This is considered a cemetery area since this is how bodies would have been arranged in a burial cave. Therefore, you may not move them because they were buried there on purpose. Back in the day, you had in terms of a burial cave, you had a picture like this. Yeah, you have the courtyard there in the middle. Then you have one section with 3 graves, 2 graves, and 3 graves. And another section of 3 graves, 2 graves, and 3 graves. And that's how it was set up back in the day. Nowadays it's different, but graves are there forever. Bode Kemenu Lahalan Asum Am. He may search for 20 hours past the place where he found the bodies. There's the distance from the back wall of one cave to the back wall of the opposite cave would have been about 20 hours. If he then found even one body at the end of those 20 hours, we assume that it's located in another burial cave, therefore he may not move that body either. But the Kemenu Lahalan Esrim Amma. He must search for 20 amos past that body. So because the matter has legs to stand on, because there is now reason to think that there may be more burial caves in the area. This is so even though if at first hand he had found only this one body together with the earth that's associated with it and buried somewhere else, he was also in the burial cave, but it may not be moved. He must also check to see if there are more bodies and caves in the area. Mishnah Dalet. We have 2 more Mishnahs, Dalet and Hay, and then we finish the Masechta. But we're changing topics for the moment. Cases of doubt about Sarah's afflictions when they come up in the beginning, when the person first comes to the Kohen, or during the 1 or 2 weeks in which he's confined, they're considered to be tar. As long as he has not yet been declared tummy by the Kohen. Once he has been declared tummy by the Kohen, sveiko tummy. Any doubt about the saras is considered tummy. Because once someone is tummy, we assume that he is still tummy until we know for certain that he has become tahor. Okay, moving into Zav for a minute. Yeshiva, Drach, and both there are 7 ways in which we check a Zav to see if his second discharge was a result of some factors besides his disease. Before he becomes Tommy as a Zav, before we decide that he's a Zav, that there are things we need to check for. The Maichel, we look into his food to see if he eats something that can cause him to have a discharge, such as fatty meat, milk, cheese, or eggs. With a mishter, we look into his drink. If he's drinking all the wine or drinking too much wine can cause him to experience a discharge. The Masa, we look into whether he carried a heavy load, which might have made him weak and caused a discharge. Ubekfitza, and we look into whether he had been jumping, which might also cause a discharge. Ubecholi, and we look into whether he had a general sickness that affected his whole body, not just his genitals. Ubemare, and we look into whether the sight of a woman caused him to discharge. Ubehear her, and we look into whether he had been thinking about a woman. If any of these happen before a second discharge, he does not become a zav, because we assume that the discharge was caused by one of these seven things, and not by the condition that makes one into a zav. Once he has already had two discharges, has definitely become tummy as a zav. In so we do not check him for these things when he has a third discharge, because the third discharge obligates him to bring the karbanos for zav, even if it resulted from these other factors. Oh, and so therefore his accidental discharge, the discharge resulting from any of these seven things that we just mentioned, was Feiko, Zaro, and his third discharge, whether there's a question whether it was resulted from his emission of semen, of zera, Tameyan, they are considered tamesh to rely on because the matter has legs to stand on. Since he's already a zav, it stands to reason that the third discharge should count no matter why it occurred. Hamake eskavera valdu, the misa, if someone hit another person and they evaluated the victim and concluded he was hurt so badly that his injuries will lead to his death, but and then he got better, than he had been, and they decided he would live after all. But after that, he took a turn for the worse and died. Chayiv, the one who hit him is Chayiv Misa, because we assume this person died as a result of his attack. And Nehemiah, however, says Pater is Pater and not the death. Because the assumption that he died of other factors has legs to stand on. Since this person recovered, he's able to assume that when he later died, it was as a result of other factors and not his original injuries. The last Mishnah of Nazir, Mishnah Hey, Nazir Hayishmul. Shmuel Hanavi was a Nazir, and if someone says, I will be like Shmuel, he becomes a Nazir. He did very Rabbi Nehorai. This is according to Rabbi Nehorai. How do we know Shmuel was a Nazir? Shenamar umora lo yale arosha. As it says in the pasuk, it was Shmuel's mother, Chana, davened for a son. This is Shmuel Aleph, Perek Aleph, that she vowed to Hashem, and a mora will not come onto his head. Namar b'Shimshon umora. Now it says about Shimshon the same thing, that a mora will not come upon his head. Namar b'Shmuel umora, and it says the same thing about Shmuel, and the mora will not come upon his head. Ma mora hamor b'Shimshon Nazir. This is the word mora that was said about Shimshon, which is in the end of Shoftim. That's the beginning of Shmuel. Just as the word mora that was said about Shimshon means a razor, and the pasuk means that no razor will be allowed to come upon his head to cut his hair because Shimshon would be a Nazir. Mora Shmuel Nazir. So too, the word mora that was said about Shmuel means a razor. And this verse also means that Shmuel would be a Nazir whose hair could never be cut. Rabbi Yossi said, "V'alo ein mora." But does the word mora in Chana's prayer for Shmuel not refer to the mora meaning the fear of flesh and blood? Chana was praying that no man should have the power over Shmuel to cause Shmuel to be afraid of him. Therefore, the pasuk means, and no fear should come upon his head. And she never said that he would be a Nazir. According, according to Rabbi Yossi, the word mora with a hey is the same as the word mora with an aleph, which means fear. It is also related to the word marus, which means mastery. Um, he agrees that the word mora means a razor, which is said about Shimon, but according to Yossi, when Chana used the word mora, it makes more sense to say she meant that no one should have power over him, to cause him to fear that's because of her full her full tefillah was, I will give him to Hashem all the days of his life, and no mora shall come upon his head. Her prayer was that Shmuel should never have to serve anyone but Hashem. Um, so Rabbi Nehurai, Rabbi responded to him, responded to Rabbi Yossi. Now look, far Nemar, it already says in the pasuk, Ayom Shmuel Eich Elech Shmuel Shaol V'Arkeni. And Shmuel said, "How can I go to anoint David as king? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." Shekvar Hayam Allah Mora Shabbos V'Dav. This shows that the fear of flesh and blood was upon Shmuel because he was afraid of Shalom Melech. Therefore, Chana could not have been speaking of fear. Rather, she must have meant that a razor would not come over Shmuel's head because he would be a Nazir. Um, right, so when Chana finished praying, the Kohen Gadol, Eli, said to her, may the God of Israel grant you what you requested of him. So with this, he assured her that her request had been granted by Shemaim. Since Shmuel was afraid of Shaul, she must not have been asking that he never fear anybody. Hadran Alech Masechet Nazir. Tomorrow we will start Sota and continue our march toward the end of Seder Nashim, which is coming up on June 9th. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.